Welcome to my new channel. This is Cerebral Lunch Meat. I have another channel called Primo Dirt Podcast that I do with my cousins. Check that one out too. But this is where the heavier subjects go. This is the band content. This is where we do deep dives, more philosophical. And today we're going to do a deep dive into comedy genre types. There's more than you realize. I think I have a list of about 60, and we'll go through them quickly, give quick definitions, and maybe some examples in real life. This is not stand-up in and of itself. This is analytical, so it's not going to be like 60 jokes per minute. The first one on my list is blue comedy, not to be confused with blue-collar comedy. It's usually more explicit, a lot of vulgarity, bad language, and non-daytime TV type stuff. Kevin Smith is an example of blue comedy. Slapstick, it's usually like over-the-top physical comedy, very silly. Airplane is an example of slapstick. Black humor, also called gallows humor or dark humor. Addams Family is an example. Usually death is made light of a lot in black comedy. Some video games, movies, on the darker themes. Unintentional humor, that's one of my favorites. It's when your buddy says something stupid in front of everyone. It's funny to everyone except for him. Or somebody runs into a screen door, a glass door, not realizing there's something there. That's unintentional humor. Absurdist. Louis C.K. is an example of absurdist humor, just over-the-top visuals. Puns, dad jokes, and newscaster humor are in a similar vein. Puns are just like wordplay, words that sound alike, used in the wrong context. Dad jokes is a little bit unintentional humor. Sometimes it's humorous in a different way than intended. It's usually safe humor. It's for any audience. One reason why it's considered kind of cheesy. Self-depreciating humor. Louis Anderson is an example of that. A lot of stand-ups partake in some self-depreciation because if they're making fun of everything else, they got to throw themselves on the fire sometimes too. But Louis Anderson pretty much does it the whole time. He makes fun of his weight and his family and his whole routine. Practical jokes, pranks, that's a type of humor. When you pull one on somebody, like April Fool's type stuff. Irony is hard to define, but it's basically when there's a mismatch, a juxtaposition of things that don't go together. And usually the subject doesn't realize it, but the audience does. That is irony. Deadpan or dry humor is when the comedian, stand-up, or the subject never laughs at what's going on. They don't understand what's so funny, but usually they are doing the acting on purpose. They never laugh. They never break that fourth wall. That's dry or deadpan humor. Stephen Wright is like the quintessential example of dry or deadpan delivery. So parody or satire, there's actually laws protecting parody. Like that's in the Constitution, that you're allowed to parody things. You're allowed to make fun of things. You're allowed to make fun of the government. You're allowed to make fun of things that exist. Like Scary Movie is an example, the series. It's usually making fun of all types of movies and genres of movies. SNL parody things a lot. They use a lot of satire on like political figures and actors, which leads us to double entendres and innuendos. Double entendres, double meanings. Usually the surface of the meaning is very innocent, but it has a double meaning, which is usually sexual in nature, which is also wordplay. We kind of went over that a bit too with like puns. That's wordplay. Gallagher and Carlin were very good at wordplay. They have some really good, I would look those up. Situational humor. That's like when the whole situation comes together to be humorous. They do that in movies sometimes where something bad is happening to somebody, but you're watching it from like a third person perspective. Yeah, that takes it's usually acted out in that case. Sarcasm, that's when it's hard to define sarcasm without the word sarcastic, but it's usually somebody who's grouchy, taking a dark, or sometimes grouchy people are funny, and taking a negative outlook is funny. That's sarcasm basically. Uh, impersonation. Some comedians make their a whole career off of impersonating actors or political figures, public figures. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone are common characters that impersonated presidents. Pandering. Pandering humor is when you know what your audience is and you're flattering your audience with mirroring their own perspective back to them. And some people like that. A lot of comedians consider it lesser comedy. A lot of comedians like to challenge the audience, challenge their perceptions, give them a new perspective. But then there's comedians that have made a career off of just telling people what they already think to reaffirm what they think. And that's funny to some people, not as much to me. British humor is next. Every country has sort of their own brand of humor that they prefer or that's like mainstream. American has their own, but I can't really analyze that because I'm in it in America. But British humor is a little more dry. It's a little more witty, and they usually don't have as much theatrics, so they depend on the jokes on themselves, on their own merit to be funny. So it has to be like wittier. It has to be witty. They usually have lower production value in their comedies and like less eccentric deliveries. So next on the list is highbrow and lowbrow. Highbrow is comedy for like elites or more well-off people, and then lowbrow is the opposite. Lowbrow is a reaction to highbrow, which is the common person, and they usually like to bring down highbrow or mock authority figures, politicians, that type of thing. Something the average person can relate to. Inside jokes. So everybody has inside jokes with their friends that only you and your friend get the context of. And there's certain audiences that are in on the joke as well. Like Andy Kaufman, if you knew what he was doing, you're in on the joke as well. You knew what was going on. But most people didn't get it yet. They didn't know they were actually part of the joke while it's in progress. Memes can be inside jokes. Nested within the joke is a joke that only some people have the context for. Hyperbole. Hyperbole is a lot of times is used as an insult. It means it's an imbalance in like knowledge or context of the joke, but it's also just a lot of times humor is juxtaposition. So sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's used as an insult. Anti-comedy. Anti-comedy is when you have like a traditional setup, but then the actual punchline is less traditional, like why did the monkey fall out of the tree? Because he died. That's anti-humor. Just a different type of delivery. Insult humor. That's like roasts, celebrity roasts. Don Rickles was the king of insult comedy. Look up Don Rickles if you have not. Improv. That's when the comedy is improvised on the spot. So sometimes they're given a subject, and it could be an individual or a group, but a lot of times it's done in groups so people can play off of each other, and that's hilarious, seeing people trying to figure out in real time how to react or create humor out of nothing. And sometimes it's like skit humor, where there's a loose storyline that they have to follow, and they have to get from point A to point B, from point A to point B somehow, and it's up to the actors to figure that out together. Crowd work. Crowd work is when the comedian doesn't have a script and he is questioning or pointing out things about the audience live in real time, asking them what their occupation is often, what their name is, coming to conclusions about them that is humorous to the audience. A lot of times it's insult comedy. That's crowd work. Heckling is the other side of that. That's when the audience is trying to mock the comedian. That's very dangerous and rarely goes very well for the heckler because comedians are professionals. Unless it's against a rookie, could throw a rookie off his whole routine. There's a good example of it with Chappelle versus Eddie Murphy in Dr. Dolittle. That scene is hilarious. Look it up. Sketch comedy, I think we kind of went over that with improv. Sketch comedy usually has an agreed upon storyline, but how they get there is improvised a lot of times and ad-libbed. Prop comedy, we all know the most famous prop comedian is Carrot Top. And Gallagher did some prop comedy. It's all about the props, prop puns, They build things and they show them on stage. Next, we have musical comedy, like Book of Mormon. A lot of plays have music in it. You have South Park has music. Anything that has music and is funny. Adam Sandler, it has a lot of musical comedy on stage. And Bo Berman is another musical comedian. Juvenile or sophomoric humor. It's usually an insult. It usually means that like fart jokes, poop jokes, that type of thing. Low-hanging fruit. Topical. Usually, sometimes that can be improv as well, or it could just be about topics of what's going on at the time, political or social, or what's happening in the room. A lot of times that's done in stand-up. Intellectual humor, that's usually just smarter humor where you have to know more things to get the comedy. You have to be quick-witted, and you have to follow along. That's intellectual humor. Dumb humor is just the opposite. It's just, again, low-hanging fruit. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Ventriloquism, that's a type of comedy where I don't know where that started. I guess maybe vaudeville. But yeah, ventriloquist dummy. Sometimes a sock puppet. Silent humor, mimes, Charlie Chaplin. It was perfected during the day when there wasn't speakers in an auditorium, so everything had to be visual. And the actual visual is another type of comedy, which is also includes prop comedy, memes, charts, visuals. I mean, silent films. They didn't have sound, so had to be visual. Physical comedy. Jim Carrey is an example. Chris Farley is an example. Hilarious. Vaudeville kind of went over that. Riddles. That's a type of humor where you have to figure out something that kind of doesn't make sense. You can look that one up. Knock-knock jokes. If you have little kids, you're way too familiar with knock-knock jokes. If you want to drive one of your family members crazy, buy their kids a knock-knock joke book. Cats. Cat humor is a type of humor. There's tons of memes and cat humor books. If you like cats, you know what I'm talking about. Storytelling. Richard Pryor was a master storyteller. Storyteller comedians, the path to the punchline is as important as the punchline itself. You have to make the whole path enjoyable, get people invested with the details, and it might have minor jokes along the way to the big payoff. Anecdotal humor. A lot of pastors do that type of thing. It's where comedians say, oh, yesterday this happened to me, or I was walking to the store this morning and this happened. And usually they're not really true. Usually it didn't happen at all, but especially it didn't happen yesterday because every time they say it happened yesterday. That's anecdotal. Visual comedy, we went over that. That's memes and props. Reductive comedy, that's sometimes it's used as an insult, but it just really means you're making fun of something or there's like an imbalance, like negativity. Observational humor, that's another type of improv where you just comment on what you observe around you and try to make that funny. Irreverent humor, that's where you're mocking things that people hold sacred, like sacred cows. Could be religion, politics, anything, shooting things down that people value, especially the audience. Aggressive humor, I guess that's a type. Like Sam Kinison was probably aggressive humor when they scream and they raise their voice a lot and cast a lot of like judgments towards things. Progressive humor, that just means like new things that are developing, new ways to deliver punchlines or to present the comedy that's less traditional. Cringe or shock, yeah, I guess Sam Kinison was aggressive, is cringe and shock as well. Usually it can be topics, it could be language, it could be the delivery, however you can get that cringe or shock. And then turn that nervousness into laughter. That's called flipping. That's a common strategy in stand-up comedy. See, topical, deadpan, alternative humor. That's kind of like progressive. It's just usually whatever's sort of new and different at the time, so that changes. A screwball comedy. That's kind of like slapstick. It's just goofy, kind of like Jerry Lewis type stuff. Romantic comedy, that's just a genre of movie, I guess, where it's kind of funny, kind of cute, and the guy and girl get together at the end, or whoever it is, whoever the subjects are. We kind of mentioned flipping, so that's when you take sad subjects and make them funny somehow. It's usually cathartic. If it's not too soon or not too far, it actually, in some ways, makes people feel better if it didn't offend you out of the room. Character comedy, that's when people play a character, like in the blue-collar comedy. Some of those were playing up maybe like white trash roots. And Pee Wee Herman was a character. That's character comedy. Callback. A callback is a common part of stand-up comedy where the comedian has a reoccurring theme or reoccurring punchline. He'll bring it out a lot of times when you least expect it, and a lot of comedy routines or specials end with the callback. So they may bring up something early on in the comedy routine. They'll go through a whole bunch of subjects till you've forgotten about it. Then they bring that subject up at the end, drop the mic, leave the stage. Common format. Post-ironic humor. I just learned about that. That's when there's a joke nested in with a joke nested in a joke. So Bo Burnham is an example when he was reacting to his reaction video to his reaction video, or when there's like a meme based on a meme based on a meme, or a joke based on a meme based on a joke. It's a type of inside joke out in the open. So usually it takes some type of context to understand, and people like it when sometimes when it's a smaller group that understand what that joke actually is, and the joke is on the people who don't get it ultimately and who are frustrated. So it's more fun to be on the knowing end of that one. And usually as people get older, they start falling out of that group. And young people love to be on the inside of like, FOMO type stuff. And then I just also learned about Neo-Dataism. So Dadaism is when things are sort of out of context, and so it makes you look at things in a new light. And Dadaism is used in comedy as well. So like if you replace people with chickens, it's kind of funny, but it makes you look at chickens or humans in a different light, like the Far Side. But Neo-Dadaism is like new millennial, nested humor type of thing, like post-ironic. I guess a part of post-ironic is that you're supposed to get the joke later. You're not supposed to get the joke right away. It's an unraveling joke that eventually leads you feel like you're going nowhere at some point, and then it goes somewhere, or it actually does leave you nowhere when you think you're going somewhere. So it's a type of like strange misdirection. Before this gets too long, I'm going to cut this off, and I'll get more content like this. But I love comedy. I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy. I'm a big fan of studying it, which is interesting. So if you guys like comedy as well, hopefully this was enjoyable to you. Like, subscribe, comment. Thanks.